Hello, this video is meant to give you a quick overview of the wasteland. When I say quick overview, I mean I'm not going over the text line by line, but eventually I plan to do that in another video. The wasteland is the most monumental work of modernism, and it is T.S. Eliot's uh, prestigious work published in 1922. Eliot had written the work at a massive scale. It was a collection of many different poems, and it was cut down to the present size by his friend Ezra Pound, to whom Eliot has given tribute as the better craftsman or il miglior fabbro in the dedication of the wasteland. The original drafts were published by Eliot's widow in 1971. The original drafts that Eliot wrote and that Ezra Pound edited. It was published by Faber and Faber. And this technique of a work built up from a number of separate poems, that is the technique that he has followed in other poems later, such as The Hollow Men and Ash Wednesday as well. And this gives the poem the semblance of a heap of broken images. But there is a very surprising unity that is there in the poem as well. The fragmentation of the poem, as everybody might know, shows a fragmented vision of a fragmented modern world. But the techniques used in the poem, the narrator, the style of writing, such as the cinematographic technique, the use of myth, etc., have given the poem a kind of unity and homogeneity through its very heterogeneity. So that is The Wasteland, published in 1922. Let me just delve into the socio-cultural background of this massive poem first and foremost. The Wasteland was written during a period of increasing urbanization and industrialization at the beginning of the 20th century. It was a very tumultuous period because it had just suffered from the Industrial Revolution and its aftermath. The World War was just over. The First World War was also just over. Technology had completely changed the world by then, and cities had come into being. Metropolises had come into being. Urbanization and industrialization were changing the landscape and culture in significant ways. And during this time, Europe was devastated by Boer War. That was at the turn of the century, just as the 20th century came into being, the Boer War with the Dutch settlers of South Africa. The British waged a war with the Dutch settlers of South Africa. That devastated Europe, and the First World War, as well as many other bloody revolutions of this period. Life was unsettled in Europe and migratory. People were moving to other places in search of a better living condition, and it was very traumatic in many parts of Europe. People were undergoing a state of unsettling trauma at this time. The only criterion of value was money. It was a materialistic society. Bourgeois materialism had reached its peak, and people were, the thinkers and the writers were revolting against the materialism and the ideal of progress. And money was ruling the roost. Nevertheless, capitalism was becoming more and more powerful. Colonialism was also in its height. So it was a very confused period. Then life had become a struggle for survival. The upper classes and the lower classes were divided. There were also some socialist ideas slowly coming into being, and all the changes and rapid devastating effects of the socio-political changes on life made it a struggle for survival. There was the loosening of sex taboos. Morality was increasingly questioned. Family life also changed. The very foundations of the family were shaken, and there was a loosening of sex taboos, which is why there is a lot of physicality of sex that you can see in Eliot's poems, such as The Wasteland, and a lament at the loss of the valuable relationships of intimacy, of mental connection. All these are lost in this time, and sex has become degraded into just a meaningless physical act. So this is a very important theme in The Wasteland. Now, continuing with the socio-political background, individuals became islands to themselves. Individuals are like islands. They are isolated from one another. This is a world where people do not understand one another. When you heard about, when we discussed Ulysses in another video, I talked about how these characters are all wandering in Dublin like islands. They are unable to connect or belong. So this is the condition of the modern man. Individuals are unable to connect and belong. They are the flaneurs in the metropolises, in the cities. They are just wanderers who are wandering aimlessly, unable to find meaning or identity. There is also the loss of spiritual values and the loss of all moral and ethical values. That happened in the late 19th century itself. In poems of W.B. Yeats, for example, we can see a lament of the loss of all moral and ethical values in this sense. And in poems like Sailing to Byzantium, for example. And because of this, there is a hollowness, there is an emptiness in Western civilization, in modernist society. So that is what you see in The Wasteland. Life became mechanical and fragmented. Life became empty and hollow, and life became like a wasteland. So that is what you see here. The wasteland is a metaphor for all these developments. Hysteria and paranoia are contemporary experiences. Many characters in The Wasteland, when they speak, they are hysterical, they are desperate, they are on the verge of a nervous breakdown or collapse. So hysteria and paranoia, because of desperation, because of frustration, they are contemporary experiences, because of lack of connection. So all these experiences and traumas of the modernist society are depicted in the form of the text itself. The text is not a usual linear narrative. There is no single narrator. There is no a single point of view. There is no plot or story that you can follow through. And many times we do not understand what is happening. There is a mixing up of voices. There is a mixing up of past and present. So it is in this bizarre way that the poem is narrated to show the lack of moorings of the modernist society. The poem was composed during Eliot's convalescence in Margate after a nervous breakdown. So the whole of Europe has undergone a nervous breakdown in this period, and Eliot personally also had undergone a nervous breakdown. And the original draft in 19 pages had more than 1,000 lines. Now the poem has only 400 plus lines. So more than half of it was reduced by Ezra Pound. The original draft of the poem was very long, 1,000 lines long. It was edited and revised by Ezra Pound, and now it is 433 lines. At first, Eliot considered the title "He Do the Police" in different voices. It is a very absurd statement that you find in Charles Dickens's Our Mutual Friend. In Our Mutual Friend, Betty Higden is saying this about her stupid adopted son Sloppy. And he's reading the newspaper aloud, and Betty Higden is very proudly saying about her adopted son, "He do the police" in different voices. That was what Eliot wanted to be the title at the beginning. But then he changed it to The Wasteland, which is a title taken from Jessie Weston's From Ritual to Romance. The Wasteland was first published in the United Kingdom in the Criterion, in the first issue of the Criterion in October 1922, which was edited by T.S. Eliot himself until the end of its publication, until the journal ceased publication, T.S. Eliot was the editor of the Criterion. It was first published in the US in the famous journal The Dial, with the very next month in November 1922. And this poem uses very many different techniques, techniques that are very different from the conventional romantic techniques of the 19th century. The poem, as I told you, is a heap of broken images that proceed without much logic. And the unifying factor, one of the unifying forces in the poem, is the use of myth. The poem is put together many different perspectives and stories, and fragments of texts are all put together with the mythical framework of the Fisher King, as well as the mythical the image of the wasteland itself, and as well as the narrator Tiresias. And this poem progresses, therefore, not in a very rational manner, but think of, let us say, the logic of music or the logic of collage in art, where in music, for example, it is not a plot that you get, it is not a story, but a message is given to you, or a mood is conveyed to you by the use of repetition and variation of motifs. In collages, different disparate pieces of images, fragments of images are put together on a canvas, and the juxtaposition of these will create some new meanings. This is also the technique used in film, where two very different scenes can be put together to create a third meaning in what is called montage. In film, there are also so many other ways in which meanings are created, such as variations in point of view, the technique of dissolving, panning, zooming, close up, etc. So the wasteland also explores these techniques, and the most important of these techniques is especially the use of myth. In a review of James Joyce's Ulysses, which was also published in the same year, T.S. Eliot praised Joyce's use of the mythic method. In Joyce's Ulysses, Joyce is using the myth of the Odysseus's journey back home to Ithaca. And this is what Eliot says. I have quoted this elsewhere also in this video. Later, I will be quoting this, in manipulating a continuous parallel between contemporaneity and antiquity, Mr. Joyce is pursuing a method which others must pursue after him. So, T.S. Eliot is saying that the method of Joyce should be considered a model by the others. What is that method? It is simply a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy, which is contemporary history. This is a very famous statement that he has made. So myth is, what is the myth? It should be used by the modernist writers. Myth is a technique that should be used by the modernist writers. Myth is simply a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy, which is contemporary history. Contemporary history is futile. It is no use. It is meaningless. It is anarchic. And how do you deal with such a contemporary history, with the present time? By giving it some sort of shape and order. How do you do that? By using mythology. Thus, the mythic method is the solution that he is giving for the modernist malady of fragmentation. The mythic method is the solution to the malady or disease or trouble that modernists are suffering from. What is that trouble? Fragmentation. Eliot himself has presented this fragmentation elsewhere as the dissociation of sensibility. When the head and the heart become separated, when there is no unity between thoughts and emotions, that is when fragmentation occurs, he has said, in the context of the metaphysical poets. Coming back to the use of myth, Eliot uses fragments of various myths in the Wasteland. The Wasteland is a massive poem which employs a collection of mythologies. Lots of fragments of different myths are used in the Wasteland. We have the myth of the Fisher King very centrally to the Wasteland. I also mentioned the myth of the Wasteland itself, the myth of Tiresias as the narrator. Then we have a number of other myths like the myth of Philomel, the stories of the great heroes from Homer onwards, down to Dante and Laforge, the French symbolist Laforge. So many writers, how they have rewritten these past stories. Eliot has imbibed, from it, energy from it, meanings from it. That is how he has written the Wasteland. And also myths from East and West, from India, from Jewish culture, from Christianity, everywhere. Greek classicism. Now, Eliot's use of symbol of perfection sought by the knights of the round table in Arthurian legends. That is why he is using mythology. Eliot used this is how he is using myth. Eliot used as a symbol of perfection sought by the Knights of the Round Table in Arthurian legends. What is it? The quest for the Holy Grail, the quest motive, the belief that in Arthurian mythology, the belief that if the Knights of the Round Table went in search of the cup from which Jesus Christ drank, that is the Holy Grail, and bring it to their kingdom, there will be fertility in their kingdom. So this is the fertility myth and also the quest motif. And he used myth to express his lack of faith in society to rebuild itself. Remember, modernism later gave way to myth criticism. Many early 20th century writers, that is the pre-Second World War writers, turned to myth in different ways to make sense of the chaos and disorder of modernist period of Europe in the early 20th century. We can see this in the myth critics like Northrop Frye later. We can see this earlier, the use of myth in Sigmund Freud, and now in the modernist writers also. So myth is a way to purge, to purify, and to be reborn. You have to overcome the troubles of this existence, of the present time. You have to purge the negativity, the evil, the rottenness, and you have to purify and be reborn. That is why Eliot is using fertility myths also in this poem. And the land is in need of regeneration and rebirth. The land is urgently in need of regeneration and rebirth because there is a deadness in this land. As you might know, Eliot talks about death in life state. Everybody is alive in the wasteland, but they are all spiritually dead. So death in life, that is a condition that is the living condition of the people of the wasteland is death in life. And such a land where people and everything is dead in living is in need of regeneration or rebirth and purification. But the search for these is as futile as life itself. Life is futile and it looks like there is no solution to your problems. There is no savior coming. So the search for solutions and regeneration, rebirth, etc. seems to be as futile as life itself. Then the use of myth borders on the central myth in the wasteland, that is the quest for the Holy Grail. The quest for the Holy Grail is taken from Jessie L. Weston's book From Ritual to Romance that was published just a couple of years ago in 1920. And before that, mythology and anthropology were discussed by another major writer, James Frazer. Like Jessie L. Weston's From Ritual to Romance, James Frazer's Golden Bough is also a source of the wasteland, and it is a central inspiration for Eliot's Wasteland. And Jessie L. Weston's book, published in 1920, presents the Holy Grail myth, and Eliot has used it as the objective correlative of the poem. All the different diverse elements of the poem, The Wasteland, are all conveyed by one image, one objective correlative, that is the Holy Grail. I have just put one ancient cup here. We don't know, nobody has ever seen the Holy Grail. We don't know where is the Holy Grail either. I have just put it here as a symbol. And the quest for the Holy Grail in Arthurian legends is undertaken by Sir Percival. Sir Percival's search for the Holy Grail, which was used by Christ to drink and later to collect his blood after crucifixion. That divine cup Percival searches for. And Percival reaches Fisher King's country, which had been turned into a wasteland after curse. So these are all beliefs in the early medieval period, and people were searching for the Holy Grail actually in the early medieval period. And Percival reached the Fisher King's country and saw that Fisher King's country had been turned into a wasteland, and the only solution for this is bringing the Holy Grail. And he also searches for the Holy Grail in Chapel Perilous. All that is alluded to in this poem by T.S. Eliot. Now, the Wasteland uses fertility myths and vegetation myths taken from James Fraser's Golden Bough. I mentioned this book before. It was written some 30 years before Jessie Weston's book, and it was a classic. James Fraser's Golden Bough was a classic, and Eliot took allusions from anthropology and culture, ancient culture, from this book. It presents myths of Adonis, Attis, and Osiris. They are all very important Greek figures, and discusses the sacrificial killing of kings. These are part of fertility myths. The dying god, the scapegoat, etc. The book by Fraser discusses all these ideas, and it analyzes the primitive mind, the primordial human mind, how it worked. It analyzes, because it was an anthropological treatise. The title, The Wasteland, alludes to the wasteland in the Oedipus myth. The title actually is taken from Jessie L. Weston, and it was first used by Thomas Malory in Morte d'Arthur, and as Eliot himself has pointed out in his notes. But the most prominent use of the wasteland, which occurs several times in ancient writings, is the Oedipus myth, where Oedipus's land turned into a wasteland because of sin. And here in our modern wasteland also, Eliot presents sin and lack of spirituality as the reasons for the land turning into wasteland. The biblical wasteland in Ezekiel is also alluded to. There is this biblical wasteland in Ezekiel, and also the wasteland in the Holy Grail legend, as I already told you. So all these are alluded to. In all these cases, the wasteland is the result of the misuse of sex. It is when sex becomes mere physical and meaningless and loveless. It becomes materialistic. That is when these countries, these places turned into wastelands. So we need to go back to, this is a very Christian idea, because with the eating of the forbidden fruit or the original sin, man lost his innocence regarding sex. And now the wasteland wants to go back to the time before the original sin. We have to revive the real meaning of relationships. The protagonist of the wasteland is not very clear, but T.S. Eliot himself has pointed out that the Theban prophet Tiresias, who appears in many ancient plays, Greek plays like Oedipus Rex or Oedipus Tyrannus, Tiresias is the protagonist of the poem. However, what is interesting is that he doesn't appear at the beginning of the poem and stay in the poem like Hamlet or any great hero. Tiresias does not even really appear in the poem. Just a glimpse of Tiresias we get in section 3. And in the first two sections, we don't even know who is the protagonist. But Tiresias is an appropriate metaphoric protagonist. because he leads a liminal existence, in between existence, neither dead nor living. And Tiresias is symbolic of all the characters in the wasteland. You can also say that all characters in the wasteland are Tiresiases. Every character is like a manifestation of Tiresias. Tiresias has both male and female figures. He's an old man with a wrinkled female breast. This character was taken originally from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and also the tragedians before that. A diverse character he is, with diverse possibilities, because he is blind. He is neither blind nor sighted, because he has inner sight, insight. Powerful inner vision is there. He is immortal, neither dead nor living, and he is prophetic. All that becomes important in the wasteland. And also he is bisexual. He is neither man nor woman. He is bisexual. So in a very conservative point of view, this means degeneration of great spiritual love. Bisexuality or homosexuality was looked down upon in the beginning of the 20th century. And that is regarded as a degeneration of spirituality in this case. Tiresias lived both in this world and the other world. That is another way he strides two boats. He is liminal. Eliot says Tiresias is an all-inclusive consciousness. What he sees is the substance of the poem. Tiresias does not appear as a character here who undergoes experiences and who has a story. No, not like that. Rather, Tiresias is a consciousness, all-inclusive consciousness. His consciousness encompasses every character's consciousness. And what he sees is the substance of the poem. Tiresias and the Sibyl of Cumae symbolize perpetual old age. That is also very significant. The epigraph of the poem refers to Sibyl of Cumae, and that reminds us that Sibyl of Cumae, who has immortality, it is not a boon actually, it is a curse of immortality, because she doesn't have the boon of youth. She becomes older and older and older, and she hangs inside a cage and she wishes to die. Tiresias also is a symbol of perpetual old age, and this perpetual old age is a signifier for the condition of the wasteland, where all youthfulness and all meaning has disappeared. Here is a picture of Tiresias appearing to Odysseus, painting by the famous artist John Henry Fuseli. Now, the major themes of the wasteland before we go into the text. The wasteland is about the decline of Western civilization because of its own doings, because of materialism, because of physicality, because of loss of spirituality, and because of the degeneration of love and sex. Love and sex or physical relationship have lost their real meaning, and they have been degenerated into just meaningless activities. A culture which is not able to expel the unwanted tendencies and thus becomes a wasteland. That is what it shows. The impossibility of recovering meaning in life. You are unable to find any meaning in life. You are unable to have an identity. You are unable to have a direction in life. That condition of existence is what is characterized in the wasteland. Spiritual degeneration of contemporary culture as a result of all the reasons that I have told you already, as a result of the coming of materialism, spiritual degeneration because of the erosion of religion. In the Victorian period, there was the Victorian dilemma, and religion was proved wrong, and religion became propagandist and began to be used for political benefits. So politics took over at this time. Spiritual degeneration happened in contemporary culture, as well as a mechanization of life because of the discovery of science and technology. Because of technology, there is the mechanization of life. Now, the epigraph of the wasteland. The epigraph is taken from the Roman writer Petronius, who wrote Satyricon. Satyricon was written in the 1st century AD, and an extract from Satyricon is the epigraph. It tells the story of the Sibyl of Cumae in 2 lines. It is narrated by Trimalchio to amuse his drunken company in Satyricon. The story of the Sibyl of Cumae and her suffering is narrated in a very hilarious manner and made fun of by Trimalchio and his drunken companions. The Sibyl of Cumae is unable to die. She has the curse of immortality, and she is old and not youthful. So she is hanging from a bottle. She has become so small that she is hanging from a bottle. And when the boys said to her, "Sibyl, what do you want?" she replied, "I want to die." That is what Trimalchio is saying. "With my own eyes, I saw the Sibyl of Cumae hanging from a cage." In the story, cage or bottle, both are there, with children asking her, "Oh, Sibyl, what do you want?" And she replied, "I want to die." That is the condition of the wastelanders also. The wastelanders also want to die. They just can't go on living like this because life is more painful than death itself. The pathetic plight of the Sibyl suggests or anticipates the images of decay and decomposition in the main text. The epigraph begins the poem by talking about the desire for death, and the poem gives us so many symbols of death and decay throughout, and how the wastelanders are all living biologically. I mean, actually, scientifically speaking, they are living, biologically speaking, but they are dead inside, spiritually dead. And Sibyl is a symbol of a culture afflicted with all spiritual maladies, with the spiritual problems, and she craves for death. So she actually symbolizes a very diseased culture, spiritually diseased culture. In the pre-publication version of the poem, the epigraph was the horror, the horror. Before this Sibyl's story was told, before this, the poem was called the horror. Sorry, the epigraph was the horror, taken from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. These are the last words that Marlowe heard Kurtz speak. After that, we don't know if Kurtz said anything. The horror. He looked at something in front of him, some apparition, it seemed, and he said the horror. And it says, it means the horror of what not only the Europeans are doing to the Africans, but also the horror of how Europeans are corrupted by the darkness of Africa. So this was the first epigraph. It was changed on Pound's suggestion. And after the epigraph, you see a dedication. The poem's dedicatee is Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound, the editor, is the dedicatee of the poem. And as I told you before, Eliot refers to him as Il Miglior Fabbro. Il Miglior Fabbro, or the better craftsman. And this is a phrase taken from Dante's Purgatorio. Il Miglior Fabbro is a Latin phrase taken from Dante's Purgatorio, and it was Dante's tribute to the poet Arno Daniel. I forgot to mention one thing. The epigraph of the poem is in both Greek and Latin. 2 languages are there in the epigraph. When I said Latin, I remembered. And it was Dante's tribute to the poet Arno Daniel, his contemporary. The sections of The Wasteland are, as you might know, there are 5 sections. The burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and what the thunder said. These are the 5 sections of the poem. These sections were made by Ezra Pound, and the first section shows devastating pictures of death and decay, and the second section shows 2 episodes of women in loveless relationships. The fire sermon shows a lot of sterile love, affairs, love affairs that are meaningless and out of which nothing comes. And at the end, he talks about Buddha and Saint Augustine, uh, justifying the title, the Fire Sermon. Death by Water is a very short section where a prophecy made in the first section by Madame Sosostris is fulfilled. She had said, "Fear death by water." And here in the fourth section, Phlebas the Phoenician dies. Now, why does he die and what is this all about? See, in the wasteland, people are sinners and they are suffering. They have no spirituality. And the river that should give life, rain also that should give life, are all polluted, and there is no rain, it's a desert, the river is polluted, etc. That is what you see in the beginning. And then you see that it's all because of lack of spirituality in relationships. Physicality of life is the reason. And in death by water, the suggestion is that you have to die and be reborn, like it happens in the fertility myths. During Ganesh Puja, for example, we submerge images of Ganesh. During Durga Puja, we submerge images of Durga. And the god will be reborn again. Like that, death by water suggests a ritualistic drowning and rebirth, which will lead to rebirth. What the thunder said is indeed taking us it is showing us very bizarre pictures of Eastern Europe and suggesting journeys in search of the Holy Grail and journey to Chapel Perilous. And then it is taking us to the banks of the Ganges in India. The Westerners should turn to the East for some meaning, and they should learn some lessons from the East. Remember, when Eliot is writing, it was not even 10 years after Rabindranath Tagore had got his Nobel Prize. And Rabindranath Tagore was very famous at this time in the West. The Westerners loved his poetry, Gitanjali, and Macmillan had published it in English, and everybody must have read it at that time. And Eastern culture and Indology, Indian studies, etc., were becoming very trendy in those days. A lot of Westerners engaged in studies of the East. And because of all this, T.S. Eliot also says we should learn from the East because there is no spirituality in the West. And he goes to the banks of the Ganges and he talks about the thunder. It is a Upanishadic thunder mentioned in the Upanishads. The thunder is rolling and it is saying da. The da of the thunder is datta, dayadhvam and damyata, or give, sympathize and control. So this is the solution to our wasteland problems. We have to ritualistically die and be reborn, and we have to burn in fire in the fire sermon, and then we have to drown in water, and then we'll rain down. Do you understand? So we have to give, surrender. Give means it's kind of surrender. Surrender, sympathize, control. These are the ways in which the thunder gives these solutions. These are the ways in which you can overcome the malady of the wasteland. That is in a nutshell. The first 4 sections of the poem correspond to the Greek classical elements of earth, air, fire and water. Earth is burial of the dead, earth. A game of chess is air, fire sermon, and then death by water. So, and then rain, it is last one. Thunder and rain. So, that is in a nutshell. Now we are going into the poem, but we are not reading from the poem here. It is only an overview. I will do a line-by-line analysis of this poem in Udemy because it is prescribed in universities and for exams. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief overview of the sections now. I'm not going into the text proper. The Wasteland was published in the first number of the Criterion in 1922, as you know. And the first section is called The Burial of the Dead. As you might know, it begins, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. And then it is April and there is nostalgia about winter. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow. So this burial of the dead begins by talking about April. The title, The Burial of the Dead, refers to the Anglican burial service of the Church of England, or the burial of the effigy of the fertility god. So both Church of England and pagan religions are evoked here in the title. The Anglican burial service of the Church of England is evoked, as well as the burial of the effigy. There will be an idol or effigy that is buried of the fertility god, and rituals associated with Adonis, Attis, and Osiris. This is also alluded to in the title. There are 5 episodes in the section Burial of the Dead. The first episode is what we just saw. April is arriving, and the poet is associating April with agony, because it makes demands of them that they cannot fulfill, and also April reminds them of past and future, mixing memory with desire. Do you remember that phrase? So the first episode starts with a parody of the first line of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Remember, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales talks about praising April. April is spring and summer is dawning, and it is wonderful season, says Chaucer, when everybody wants to go on pilgrimage. But this is a reversal of that glorification of April, and he's describing the dull life of the inhabitants of the wasteland here. The main imagery of the first section, not the first section, the first episode in the first section is vegetable life. Breeding, mixing, stirring, covering, feeding, lack of emotion, without emotion, just mechanically people engaged in these activities. And this is the time, remember, when the European continent was reeling under the effects of the First World War, and the traditional aristocratic patterns of life and national boundaries were all breaking up. The old world order had fallen apart. And then in the beginning itself, Eliot talks about, Eliot talks about Countess Mary. Countess Mary is a character he talks about, and she is Russian. She's not a Russian, actually. And he is actually referring to the communist revolution of Russia here. Mary is not a Russian, he says in the poem. And that means she does not want to be associated with Russia because of its revolution. She wants to be associated with more decent people of the rest of Europe. So there is a rootlessness, an unbelonging, a nervous anxiety about identity that is, revealed in this section at the beginning itself, in the case of Mary. And this is continuing in the rest of the poem in part 2 of The Wasteland, especially. Now, this is the first episode, therefore. In the first episode, we talk about April and also one woman, Countess Mary. In the second episode, also there are like 2 parts. This second episode begins with the striking change of language. He suddenly speaks in the language of the Old Testament, like the prophet, because we are reminded of the prophet Ezekiel of the wasteland, and he is taken to the valley of the wasteland, or the valley strewn with bones, and asked, "Son of man, can these bones live?" So he is seeing the wasteland. So this second episode is addressed to the Son of Man. That is actually in the Old Testament, Ezekiel, and it presents a vision of the geography of the wasteland. And this geography of the wasteland, which is strewn with corpses and rats, etc., shows that we are spiritually dead, and we can foresee no possibilities for the fruitful end of our journey. Where is this journey leading us? What is going to happen to us? There is no, surety. There's no certainty. This anxiety is there in the section, in the episode. And it looks like we are journeying into the desert of our life, or desert of future. And the ever presence of death and meaninglessness and helplessness is there, starting from the epigraph. Remember, from the epigraph till now, we have been talking about death and helplessness. And then the third episode suddenly gives us a piece of poetry. It is from Wagner's opera, Richard Wagner's opera. And then after this piece of poetry, there is suddenly the story of a hyacinth girl told in fragments. And then again a quotation from Wagner's opera. So the third section is about a hyacinth girl, and it begins and ends with quotes from Richard Wagner's opera. The opera is Tristan and Isolde. There are two operas of Richard Wagner that are sources of the wasteland. One is Tristan and Isolde, the other is Götterdämmerung. And here, in this third episode of the first section, you are hearing about a hyacinth girl, and all this describes the degeneration of love. Because in Wagner's opera, a sailor is longing for his love, and this longing is not going to be fulfilled. He will be disappointed, and finally they die. Tristan and Isolde die. Tristan dies. So anticipation of love and disappointment is the theme of the opera that he is quoting from, and it metaphorically suggests the degeneration of love, which is what led the wasteland to be the wasteland. Now, the fourth episode in the first section introduces the dramatis personae of the poem. The characters who will come later, like the Smyrnia merchant, etc., are all presented as tarot cards, possessed by Madame Sosostris, a famous clairvoyant. Madame Sosostris is a character drawn from Aldous Huxley's Chrome Yellow. That was his first novel, Huxley's Chrome Yellow. And she has a bad cold, it seems. And this Madame Sosostris, who is telling the future through cards, tarot cards, is an ironic inversion of the prophetic figure of Tiresias. She is a very bad fortune teller. She is not a real fortune teller. She is a cheap imitation of the prophet. She is a bogus fortune teller. So this is an inversion, ironic inversion of the prophetic figure. And paradoxically, she is described as the wisest woman in Europe with a wicked pack of cards. And she begins to foretell the future, even though she has no idea what she is saying. What is again ironic is that many things that she says turn out to be true. There is only one piece of advice that Madame Sosostris gives: fear death by water. That actually happens in the fourth section. And characters like the Belladonna, Hanged Man, One-Eyed Smyrnia Merchant, etc. Appear. And then we move on to the fifth episode in this section. So she selected a card for the narrator, which is the picture of a drowned Phoenician sailor, and warns him, fear death by water. This warning is given to the narrator. Now we come to the fifth episode. Hey, wait, before that, she showed the narrator cards of Belladonna, the one-eyed merchant, the man with the staves, there is a blank card, the wheel, and she searched for the card of the hanged man. All these people are introduced. Characters are introduced. The rest of the poem is not going to be the story of these characters or anything, but the characters whom we meet in the rest of the poem are in some ways representatives of these mythic characters. The last episode in the first section begins and ends with references to Baudelaire and Unreal City. That is the beginning of the last episode. Beginning Unreal City, from Baudelaire it is. The Unreal City is the metropolis. The metropolis was an important leitmotif in modernist poetry. The metropolis is a metaphor in modernist poetry, a symbol in modernist poetry for rootlessness, unbelonging, for people being directionless. And Eliot is using a composite or a mix-up of Baudelaire's Paris, Dante's Hell, and also the London of William Blake. And he's creating a horrifying picture of the metropolis here, where dull daily life happens. In the metropolis, there is only dull daily life, and people are locked in a mindless routine. in self-destructive, mindless routine. And remember, you may not know, I will tell you, Dante in Inferno describes the spiritual emptiness of the souls, who are condemned in Inferno. The people who are condemned to be punished in Inferno are people with spiritual emptiness. And when Dante describes them in Inferno, he signals to one man, he isolates one person out of it. And he was the Pope. He was one Pope. And why is he signaled out, he identified and picked out? Because he was a man guilty of cowardice. He was a coward and he allowed a bad Pope to govern the church. Did you understand? So this Pope is reappearing here in the form of Stetson. In the last episode, our narrator refers to a fellow that he knew, an acquaintance called Stetson. Stetson is also the name of a hat that many ordinary people wore at that time. So it is just somebody, that is the meaning. The figure of Stetson is reminiscent of that character from Dante. And he is referring to Dante's medieval hell as a representation of this city. This metropolis is like a hell. What you see here is a surreal picture. The speaker is walking through London populated by ghosts of the dead, and he confronts a figure called Stetson. And he says he fought with Stetson in the Mile battle. He's talking about battles. And remember, the book is also written immediately after one of the most horrifying battles of the 20th century, the First World War. And when he refers to Mile and Dante, etc., he's also referring to the 19th century, because here as well as later in the poem we understand that it is not just any one city he's talking about. He's talking about 19th century cities like that you see in Dickens. He's talking about all kinds of cities even in the past also. So he is talking about this decay or rottenness or deadness as a malady of humankind whenever they lived. Did you understand? Even in the past it was there. It is not just the problem with the present. So that brings us to the end of the first section. Is it tedious and boring? If you want, you can pause the video and take a break. But I'm continuing. In section 2, which is titled A Game of Chess, the allusion is to Thomas Middleton's play A Game at Chess. In A Game at Chess, chess is symbolically employed as a game that shows the relationships of political relationships of the people in the play. There is another play, Women Beware Women, by Middleton himself, where each move in the game of chess is matched with stages in the seduction of the protagonist Bianca. Bianca is being seduced inside the room by the prince. Meanwhile, outside the room, without knowing what is happening inside, her mother-in-law is playing chess with another woman. So that is a story of lust and manipulation and deceit, and all that is alluded to in this title. The title denotes stages in a seduction, and it is allusion to another play by Middleton, Women Beware Women. Now, in this play, a game of chess is played between Livia, who is acting on behalf of the Duke of Florence, and the other partner in chess is mother of Leoncio. Leoncio is the husband of Bianca, and Bianca is being seduced inside the room while Livia is playing chess with Leoncio's mother. The game is only a ruse to distract the mother, whose daughter-in-law is meanwhile being seduced by the Duke on the balcony above, not room, balcony above. Okay, now following this, there are two sections here, two episodes here, two scenes here depicting two women. First, we see a rich woman. Second, we see two women talking about their friend, another poor woman. So first, we see a rich woman. Second, we see she's waiting. She's elaborately getting dressed and waiting for her lover. And when her lover comes, there is no love. He quickly finishes the job and wants to leave. And she is longing for emotional connection, which he cannot give her. She is like hysterical and neurotic. The second episode is about two women in a bar talking about their friend Lil, and Lil is engaged. Lil is in a very loveless relationship. Lil's husband, whenever he comes from war, gets Lil pregnant, and Lil has had many childbirths and miscarriages, which has made her very broken in the body. Now the husband might even leave her because she is no longer good looking. This is the story of Lil. So we see two sad pictures of loveless relationships here, one rich and the other poor. Let us go into the details. The first scene depicts the mechanical life of an aristocratic lady. The first scene depicts the mechanical life of an aristocratic rich lady. And this is a mock heroic setting. She is in her dressing room and elaborately she is getting dressed, reminiscent of Cleopatra. And the whole decoration, all the decorations and the whole scene has an excessive artificial quality. It is not very real and meaningful either. And then there are allusions to Philomel here, because Philomel was raped, and then her tongue was cut out so that she won't talk about it, and gods made her a nightingale. She gave the voice of the nightingale. So that allusion is there, and this woman is meeting her lover. So after she has, in a parody of Barbus's description of Cleopatra, how she got dressed is parodied like that. The chair she sat in like a burnished throne burned on the marble. That is an inversion of Barbus's line. The barge she sat in like a burnished throne burnt on the water, describing Cleopatra, famous lines. So after that, we are seeing that there is a loveless encounter between the lady and her lover. The male companion or lover is resigned and playful, and he does not respond to her frantic questions. He just leaves because he knows that replies are also probably useless. So there is no communication happening between them. There is no connection. There is no love. That is the meaning. And then after this, the second scene happens. It is set in a pub where, in a Cockney area in London, where some low-class women are chatting and gossiping. It is late night, and they are talking about Lil and her husband Albert. There is no love between them. She has been bearing children after children, and all this has taken a heavy toll on Lil's death. And her teeth are also very bad now. Her appearance is deteriorating. And when her husband comes next time, if she doesn't look good, he is going to dump her. Because her husband, Alfred, is irresponsible and unsympathetic. That is what you see in this section. So they are gossiping about Lil, the broken woman in a loveless marriage. This section ends when the bartender has to close the pub. So he's asking everybody to leave, and the farewells that the people leaving the pub give is intermingled with Ophelia's farewell, which is sadly sweet, of course. Ophelia's sad farewell in Hamlet is intermingled with the farewells of the people leaving the pub. So, good night, ladies, good night, good night, good night. That is repeated several times. And this accentuates the tragedy of these episodes that we just witnessed. In this section, by selecting doomed female characters from history and mythology, as well as contemporary society, the writer creates an epitome of degeneration. These lovers are like pawns in a game of chess, and all that they have is decay and death. There is no blooming of love in their lives. Now, the third section is fire sermon. That is the longest section. We don't know why it is called a fire sermon until the end of that section. Um, and at the end of the section, he refers to Buddha and Saint Augustine. That is when we know why this is called fire sermon. In this long section, the title alludes to Buddha's sermon on the fires of anger, malice, and lust. These are fires that will consume you. That is why in the next section you should die. Section contains a series of increasingly debased sexual encounters. You see a lot of sexual encounters out of which nothing really comes. Where they are mechanical or violent, and there is no respect happening. There is a lot of reference to history also here. Elizabeth and Leicester, the homosexual relationship of the Smyrna merchant, the rape of Philomela, Sweeney and Mrs. Potter. Like there is prostitution, there is loveless extramarital affairs, there is the pretension of love between Elizabeth and Leicester, there is homosexual love. None of this actually leads to any joyous culmination. So he's referring to the typist and a carbuncular young man also here. And like in the previous section, they are like mechanical in their love relationship. They are bored and tired in their relationship, and there is no pleasure in their sexual act. It is in this section that we see a desolate riverside scene, and we realize that Tiresias is sitting there. The speaker introduces suddenly as Tiresias. And this is a crucial moment in the poem. The music crept by me upon the waters. That is a very famous line. And then he refers to Ariel's song in The Tempest. The polluted river stands for spiritual degeneration. In the fire sermon, that is the last part, the last scene when we see degeneration. But after this, from death by water, the regeneration has to begin. The final lines in part 3 offer some hope because they turn to Buddha and Saint Augustine. So now a structure of the stanza I've given here. The first beginning, the structure of the section I've given here. The beginning of the section presents a horrid picture. Till now I was talking about this is game of chess, that is over. Next we are talking about fire sermon. In this section I gave, this slide I already showed you. In this slide I just gave you an overview of the section. This is an overview of the section. In the next slide, I am going to talk about the section in a little more detail. The first stanza presents a horrid picture of the river Thames and its bank deserted by people during winter. It is a very contrasting image, contrasting with Prothalamion. In Spenser's Prothalamion, Thames is beautiful and the Thames daughters are singing their song. But here, that Spenserian line is repeated like a refrain with a great sadness. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. That line is repeated in the third section of The Wasteland to evoke sadness because the reality of the Thames is very different here. And the first direct reference to the name of the protagonist, Tiresias, is made here in this section. It describes the experiences of the typist and the mechanical sexual encounter with her young carbuncular lover. His face is not so good looking. It has problems. And he's a house agent's clerk. There is absolutely no enjoyment or love in their relationship. Next, we hear the song of the Thames daughters. The Thames daughters are singing now, and they're singing is taking us to the song of Ariel also that I mentioned. Then we come to the end of the section. That is where we talk about why the Thames daughters are singing is because there is a lot of difference between the earlier depictions of Thames, the Renaissance depictions of Thames, and now. Now there is violation and confusion. That is the story they are telling us. The Thames daughters are telling us a story of violation and confusion and disaster and madness. And all the disasters that we heard about in the section are coming to a close in the reference to Buddha and Saint Augustine. Both Buddha and Saint Augustine came to an understanding of their problems in philosophy and spirituality, and they saw a way forward. So there is hope. So at the end of the fire sermon, the disastrous picture of Europe is coming to a climax and giving us some hope. The next section is Death by Water. It is, as I already told you before, the shortest section of the wasteland. Death by Water reminds us of Madame Sosostris's warning. What did she say? What was her warning? Fear death by water. And if, Phlebas the Phoenician is dead, and that dead sailor somehow reminds us of Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, and in both these cases, both these sailors have had a disastrous end. The poem also connects with, the section also connects with Ulysses' voyage as imagined by Dante and Tennyson. In Dante's Inferno and in Tennyson's poem Ulysses, you can see references to this. And what is expressed in this section is the extreme opposite of what Buddha and Saint Augustine expressed. Here, there is frustration, and it actually refers to a poem. It gives us a very bleak picture. I will come to that, but first I have to explain that this section is actually a verbatim translation of a French poem that Eliot had earlier written called Dans les Restaurants. In the Restaurant. That is the poem that Eliot himself had written earlier in French. And what is that poem about? In that poem, a dirty old waiter is telling a customer how at the age of 7 he had been on the point of having sex with a young girl. And he was not able to have sex because a dog came, and big dog came, and he was scared and he ran away. The following lines in the section, the lines in this section, Death by Water, where the lines describe the death of Phlebas the Phoenician, who has died by drowning and has forgotten worldly cares. That is actually from that French poem. In the French poem, also Eliot had said this. Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight drowned, forgot the cries of gulls and profit and loss, and he forgot everything. The sea current, the currents in the sea carried him away and took him back through the stages of his former life. That is how it is said, and it is the implication is that Phlebas is a man who sought only physical pleasures and not spiritual wisdom. Phlebas came to such an end because he was a sinner and he sought only physical pleasures, and he had no spiritual wisdom. So the narrator is warning the reader. Consider Phlebas the Phoenician. Recall your own mortality. Remember, you will die. And mend your ways. That is the warning that he is giving us. So that is the small section, Death by Water. Now there is another big section, that is What the Thunder Said. This section begins in a bleak desert landscape, and eventually we come to rain on the banks of the Ganges also. The title, that is why thunder. This title and the thunder is actually an allusion to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Of the many Upanishads in India, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has talked about this thunder. And immediately after this section begins by turning from the water that drowns to the water that saves. Now, in this section, it is not water that drowns like before, it is water that saves. And there is the evocation of Jesus. He talks directly about Jesus Christ, attempts to achieve peace under the shadow of religion. That is what it is. Jesus was believed to be a god by his followers, but Jesus died. That is mentioned in the beginning of this section. So we have to revive the spirit of Jesus. The quest for salvation and inner peace is expressed through objective correlatives. There are three objective correlatives through which he is expressing the quest for salvation. Everybody wants salvation. To you, salvation might be in the form of passing NET with JRF or getting a college professor's job or something like that. For some other people, salvation will mean a lot of money. You see all these physical, material things we are stuck with. What is actually salvation? What does the Spirit want? That he is metaphorically showing here through three objective correlatives. What are they? The journey to Emmaus, the approach to Chapel Perilous, and the present decay of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe especially because that is the place corrupted by communism. Eliot was against communism, and Eliot was against these devastating changes in Eastern Europe. Now, so what Eliot is doing is describing a journey here, and it is a metaphoric journey through the wasteland, and he is also talking about a desert that is very frightening, and there is no water there. In the desert you get horrifying delusions, and this journey and this suffering refers to the journey to Emmaus and the decay of Eastern Europe manifested by the communist revolution in Russia, and the approach to Chapel Perilous. Reality and hallucination are mixed up in these images that are presented here. He alludes to Jesus again. Jesus died on the cross. The disciples were so stunned by death that when resurrected Jesus resurrected and came back, they could not accept him. They did not recognize him. And that is how the wastelanders are. They do not recognize their Savior. And Jesus had warned of a time of anarchy when prophets will be put to suffering. And Eliot thinks that what Jesus meant was this communist revolution. The time of anarchy when prophets, because the communists also prosecuted the Christians. And there is also the message of hope. Because the journey to Emmaus and Chapel Perilous are ultimately linked to the finding of the Holy Grail and hope. Now, there is the ancient India that Eliot is suggesting as the refuge. We should turn to the east. We should turn to ancient India. As I told you, in the beginning of the 20th century, ancient India was like a very great haven for the Westerners. And he is turning to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, as you know. As I told you, it refers to Christ. The next stanzas describe the last part of the journey of the quester. The desire for water is intensified. Remember, he was journeying through the desert without water. Now he wants more and more thirsty he is. He wants water. And that is when the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees. And the song goes, drip, drop, drip, drop. There is no water, but the song of the bird reminds us of water. And eventually it will rain because there will be thunder. The next stanza describes the journey of two disciples of Christ to the land of Emmaus. I told you the journey of Emmaus, it is undertaken by the disciples of Christ. And when they took that journey in the desert, they had a hallucination that a third figure was following them. In the desert, because of the strange light, you do get hallucinations like that. You see things in the desert. And the third character who was walking with them was Christ. They saw Christ. This idea is inspired by an account of such a hallucination experienced by the first Antarctic expedition team. In Eliot's time, it was very famous that a team went to Antarctica to explore the South Pole, and they also felt like this, as if they felt hallucinations. They felt as if they were seeing things. So that is alluded to here. The following stanzas after this recall the experiences of the questioner in Chapel Perilous. The chapel where he expected to find the Holy Grail is actually empty. Only the wind is home. Only the wind is there. Nothing else is there. He hears the cock crowing. In the wasteland, the cock crowing is also mentioned. And then spoke the thunder, da, 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 thrice. Each da represents a word or a message. Datta, Dayadhvam, and Damyata. Da, da, da alludes to, in the Upanishad, Prajapati's threefold advice to gods, demons, and men. Everybody, Prajapati is the ultimate god. He advised everybody to Datta means self-control. That means don't just think you are above everything. You are not supreme. Surrender, control yourself. Dayadhvam means sympathize or mercy, have mercy for others. Damyata means control. Control means be controlled by Prajapati, be controlled by God. Eliot presents three confessions, three little episodes or confessions illustrating these three pieces of advice. And the poem ends with the blessing, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So, another quick look at the themes of the wasteland. The spiritual degeneration of contemporary culture. The wasteland is about the spiritual degeneration of contemporary culture, the mechanization of life, how mechanical life has become, the decline of civilization, modern civilization, and the impossibility of recovering meaning in life. Now, a quick look at the structure of the wasteland. It is an ironic social commentary by an impersonal viewer. The commentary is on the society. Tiresias, who brings unification of sensibility, is a central figure. And the poem uses classical symbols and imagination. Eliot links the present situation of the modern wasteland with past and future. The presence of the protagonist Tiresias and the myths of the Holy Grail and fertility cults. These myths are all presented in the poem, throughout the poem. They connect the episodes in the poem. They are the connecting links in the poem. And the sections are also connected by these threads. There is also the cinematographic technique. I mentioned this already: dissolving, panning, montage, themes fading and dissolving like in film. The Wasteland is a highly esoteric poem. Esoteric means it is written in a language that only experts can understand. You cannot understand the Wasteland without a glossary. So it is highly penetrating and richly elusive. There is no clear-cut character or normal plot development like in traditional poems. The modern world is presented as spiritually distempered and fails to find solace in religion, sex, and ideologies. There is no solace to the world, and it is full of broken images. The modern world is full of broken images, like the poem also is full of broken images. Ambiguity and confusion are an integral part of modern life. Eliot presents modern life as without any fixed meanings or easy meanings. There is always ambiguity and confusion. The very structure of the poem is a metaphor. the structure of the poem as five disconnected parts, somehow connected together, full of episodes and a heap of broken images. That structure itself is a metaphor for the condition of modernity. The main suggestions in the poem are love betrayed, fertility betrayed, and rebirth is offered. Love and fertility are betrayed, but however, finally there is rebirth. But rebirth demands from us sacrifice and suffering. Therefore, rebirth is not easy and not acceptable to the contemporary world. You come to me, I want to pass net. What do? I say you have done a lot of mistakes in the past. You did not study properly, you did not do this, do that, you did not read. Okay, I will give you rebirth, but you have to undergo a very strict regimen. You have to completely devote yourself to reading and studying and this and that. That rebirth is not easy. It doesn't come easy. You want shortcuts, but I'm telling you, the wasteland is also telling you there are no shortcuts. Rebirth demands sacrifice and suffering. Datta means give yourself over to me. Give yourself up. Do not stick to your personal pressures and past habits. Give yourself over to me completely. Datta. Dayadhvam means sympathize with the characters and understand from a deep perspective. You should have a deeply empathetic mind, sympathetic mind. And lastly, self-control. Control yourself. You should transcend yourself in order to be a good student, actually, in order to pass an exam. You should transcend yourself. See, I am sitting here and making videos at 3 a.m., 2 a.m., in the death of the night, studying throughout the day, because I'm transcending myself. If I remain Kalyani and I have my pleasures and I have my, things to do, then I won't be a successful professional. I have to completely give myself up. I have to give my family life and health and pleasures and everything. First priority should be my profession, my studying, which is endless. Like that, when we do, there is rebirth. Rebirth demands sacrifice and suffering. It is not easy. And therefore, it is not acceptable to everyone, to the contemporary world. But we should do it. Otherwise, there is no survival. What are the modernist elements in the wasteland? The wasteland presents pictures of a disintegrated world. That is typically modernist. Modernism is not about a coherent story. It is not about fixed points of view. It is about shifting points of view and heaps of broken images. There is pessimism and frustration, use of illusions, symbols, mythical elements, surrealism as well as imagism, very cryptic, condensed kind of writing. But finally, there is also a ray of hope that is offered. Art will provide unity that is lost in the modern world. The hope is that art will somehow provide unity that is lost in the modern world. So there is a turning to the philosophy of the East to achieve this. Now, the mythical method. You already know this is actually a repeated slide. I don't want to read it out. You already know that myth is a way of controlling, of giving shape to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy that is contemporary history. And Eliot used myth to purge, purify, and be reborn. Now, sources of myth in the poem. That is why I had to give you that slide once again. The Bible. He has drawn myths from the Bible, from Dante's Inferno, from Virgil's Aeneid, from Ovid's Metamorphoses, from Milton's Paradise Lost, from Jessie L. Western's Ritual to Romance. He has also taken from Jessie L. Western's From Ritual to Romance, James Fraser's Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion. That is the subtitle. In his notes to the poem, Eliot refers to various catalogues of myths. He refers to various collections of myths. What are they? Such as Adonis and Attis and Osiris myth. They are the corn gods of fertility. The title of the poem is drawn from the myth of the Fisher King. and the fertility myths, which tells of a kingdom becoming barren or wasteland because of an injury to the king that made him impotent. The fisher king does not have fertility, he's impotent. Because of that, the kingdom has become sterile or barren. In order for the kingdom to become fertile again, a number of tasks or trials must be completed by one hero. Now, this poem was not all appreciated as we might think. There were many charges against the poem. One charge that was that it is totally fragmented and doesn't make sense. It's a heap of broken images and a collection of 5 separate parts. But today we have learned to accept it. And this is literary carpentry, a scholarly joiner's work. People have said that. A mosaic of quotations. And there is another charge against the poem is that there is ambiguity in the poem. The most ambiguous and difficult poem in the 20th century, definitely, The Wasteland is. Louis Untermeyer has said it's a pompous parade of erudition. The foreign codes, the codes from foreign languages, that is, form the abracadabra of the poem. It is like a magic word. Suddenly, these words and things that you don't understand bring meaning like that. What game is Eliot trying to play with his readers? So that brings us to the end of this video. I am rounding it off with the picture of a mushroom cloud. Another picture of devastation that war brought, that modernity brought. Thank you very much.